Hey, it's Mrs. Gabriel here with another Gabriel interpretation, this one on the integumentary system for anatomy and physiology. The main functions of the integumentary system include things like protection from physical, chemical, and bacterial assailants, like we talked about yesterday. Uh, it also insulates, protects cushions, our body. It controls water balance. You don't want to lose too much water, and we'll talk about that later with burns. But we also don't want to gain a lot of water when we're doing something like taking a bath or swimming. It's also heavily involved in temperature regulation, especially our sudoriferous glands. The eccrine gland being the most important in that aspect. So let's go on to the different types of epithelial membranes. So we have epithelial and connective tissue membranes that are part of the integumentary system, but most of them are going to be counted as a epithelial membrane. So when we are looking at epithelial membranes, what we're doing is we're looking at the cutaneous membrane, the mucous membrane, and the serous membrane. So the cutaneous membrane is the dry membrane. It is the external coating, highly keratinized, very good at waterproofing, really creating a barrier between us and the external environment. The mucous membranes are really great for secreting substances or absorbing things. They line anything that is open to the outside. They may secrete something like snot, for instance. You know how I like to use that as an example, and that would be helping to protect us against bacterial invasions. Serous membranes are the next membrane type that I want to talk about. And if you think about it, I want you to think of serous membranes being like sandwich membranes. And serous membranes are going to help us to lubricate in between different visceral organs that are going to be moving. So it's really for a lubricating purposes. They come in two layers. The inner layer, the one that is the most closely associated with the organ itself, is the visceral layer. And then the external layer is the parietal layer. And I always say, remember, parietal is like perimeter. In between, sandwiched in the middle, is a lubricating fluid-filled space, and it's going to be really important when your heart is beating extra, extra hard and your lungs are just going because you just had to run from a crazy dog that scared you to death or something like that. So it's really important as far as lubrication and allowing the organs to move freely past one another. Now, the next one we were talking about is the connective tissue membrane. And this is our only epithelial membrane that is really composed completely of connective tissue. Most of the other types, the epithelial types, have a connective tissue layer underneath, but the synovial membranes are completely composed of connective tissue. They line joints and they secrete fluid, and the biggest function is really for reducing friction. And any type of joint that is a synovial joint, a bone on bone, you're going to have this type of a synovial membrane inside. It does produce this lubricant that helps us to move our joints freely. Now let's talk about the structural features of the epidermis. Starting at the very top, we have the stratum corneum, and this is a highly cornified or keratinized dead layer of the skin. Notice how flattened that is compared to the cell layers below it. The next one down is the stratum lucidum, and stratum lucidum is only found in the hands and the palms of the feet, basically any place that is hairless and has a lot of contact with other objects. So it's a nice extra protective layer. Underneath that, we have the stratum granulosum and then the stratum spinosum. The very basement membrane is called the stratum basale. It used to be referred to as the stratum germinativum. This is a stem cell layer. It is highly mitotic. It is undergoing cell division. It can become a variety of a few different epidermal cells, including things like melanocytes and keratinocytes. And it is where it basements up against the dermis. So this is the very bottom layer of our epidermal layer. Let's look a little bit deeper at the structure of the skin. So you see the epidermal layer up there at the top. Those are the 5 layers we just spoke about. But remember, the epidermis only has 4 layers in most areas of the body. It's just the hairless areas, the soles of the feet, palms of the hand, have that extra 5th layer, the stratum lucidum. So the dermis is actually composed of 2 layers, and the layers don't really have a distinguishing line between them. If you're up at the very top next to the dermis, the part that is wavy and corrugated, that is going to be the papillary layer. It kind of dips into the epidermis. That's going to be responsible for giving us things like fingerprints. Then down deeper in the dermis, we have the reticular layer. And underneath that, we have our hypodermis, and our hypodermis is basically connective tissue, and quite often it is adipose tissue, as shown here. So let's talk about a couple of the structures, which are basically appendages of the epidermis. You can see that the hair follicle is an epidermal derived substance, and with it you have the sebaceous glands, and the sebaceous glands are the oil glands. I want you to also note the eccrine gland there, the little sweat gland. It shows the pore. Notice the erector pili muscle. Now the erector pili muscle is a tiny little muscle that helps our hair to stand up on end or get goosebumps when we're cold. It doesn't provide much protection as far as like thermal enhancement, but it's still active. Another structure, it's very circular down there and yellow, is the Pacinian corpuscle, but you're more familiar with the term lamellar corpuscle. They're actually synonyms in this case, and they are a deep pressure sensor. We have other nerve endings, ones that help us with thermoregulation, ones that help us when we need the erector pili to pull up that hair shaft to help give us our goosebumps. And we'll talk more about those later on. The appendage of the skin continues, and we have exocrine glands, which are sebaceous glands that we just saw that empty out into the hair follicle, help keep our hair silky and luxurious. Then we have our sudoriferous glands. I keep saying sudoriferous glands just for somebody in class that loves that word. So eccrine glands are, remember, these are really about thermoregulation, and these are about when you generally think of sweat, um, all over the body, I say eccrine everywhere. Don't forget that. Eccrine everywhere. The apocrine glands, those are only in the axillary region. They do play a role. They secrete a milky white substance, and it itself is not smelly whatsoever, but when the natural flora and fauna that live on our skin, those bacteria, when they eat that, it produces a musky odor, and we call that body odor. So they are not really very involved in thermoregulation, though. That is left up to the eccrine glands. Then we're going to go on to talk a little bit about hair and nails, which are also appendages of the skin. So the hair follicle itself is actually composed of 3 layers. We have the medulla, which is the central layer, the cortex is the middle, and the cuticle is the outer layer. When the cuticle gets dry, this is going to basically create split ends. There is this really great photomicrograph picture of a cross section of a hair follicle up here in the right corner. And we also can note in the cartoon diagram the sebaceous glands that I was just speaking of. I don't actually have a picture of the nails. I forgot to put that in. But really, the biggest thing I want you to know about the nails is it is considered an appendage of the skin. And we have the little lunule, which is that semicircle at the base of your nails, and it's kind of white looking. And the main reason for that is that's the thickest area. It's the area of growth. And it's really the only living portion of the nail. The rest is just highly keratinized. The next thing I want to talk about is burns and the rule of nines. So the biggest problem when a person gets severely burned is the fact that they're in jeopardy of losing all of their bodily fluids. So for 24 hours, you're actually considered to be sterile. Bacteria can't grow. After that, bacterial growth is your second concern. So in order to figure out how much fluids need to be replaced, scientists have come up with the rule of nines. And this is a way to calculate based on these portions of the skin how much body fluids need to be replaced. If you do not replace body fluids, then you seep and seep and seep a lot of your fluids. Your blood volume is going to decrease to the point of possible circulatory collapse. We talked a little bit about that, but you have to have proper blood volume for your circulatory system to work. If it does not, one of the things that's going to be the next to happen is renal failure. Your kidneys are not going to be able to function properly because there's not going to be enough pressure, and they will not be able to filter, and they will shut down. And that's a really, really dangerous predicament to be in as well. So some of the homeostatic imbalances of the skin that dermatologists have to deal with are amazing. There's over 1,000 ailments that affect the skin. And here's just a few to note, and one I haven't shared until now. So cold sores are basically a cause from a herpes simplex virus, and they're very, very common. The next one is impetigo, which is caused usually by a staph infection. It can be a strep infection, and it manifests itself around the mouth and nose, and sometimes on the hands. It's very prevalent in elementary age children. This one is called Grover's disease. Grover's disease is actually something I used to joke, and I called it old white man's disease. If you look it up, almost every single picture is an older gentleman of white skin tone. I got diagnosed with this in my early 30s, and I kept getting misdiagnosed, and they kept saying it was acne. And my comment back was, acne doesn't itch, because it is very, very itchy, and it appears mostly for me here, and then just at the very top of my stomach, sometimes on my back, and it flares up if I use scented lotion. Scented lotion just about kills me. I love the way it smells. Can't use it. Acne. Acne is another thing that I have dealt with throughout my life. And what I am showing you here is something called cystic acne. Cystic acne creates large boils on the skin. It's different than the other type of acne. And it is almost like you can get a pimple on top of a pimple on top of a pimple to create these cysts. Athlete's foot is another type of homeostatic imbalance caused by fungus. We talked a little bit about boils and carbuncles. Contact dermatitis, if you're using some cleaning agents and your skin gets red and itchy, that is another type of ailment. And psoriasis. The pictures here that I chose are of psoriasis because it forms these crusty plaques on your skin. They tend to be silvery white. It can actually crack and bleed, and some of them are associated with a type of arthritis. So skin cancer is the one thing I really, if you take away only one thing from this chapter, please take away the ABCDE rule. It is for the early detection of melanoma. And so what I have here is the cartoon version of the ABCDE rule. We know A stands for asymmetry, B is for border irregularity, C is for color. You're going to have multiple colors within one mole. D, diameter greater than 6 millimeters, and I always want to remind you, basically this is a pencil eraser. If you can visualize that, you know if you go bigger than that, that tends to be a warning sign. And then E is evolving. It's changing in size, shape, color, and elevation. So those are some things to look for. So here is an actual picture. Asymmetry, you can see how asymmetrical that mole is. Border irregularity, look at the uneven borders shown there. This one has multiple colors and then a diameter greater than 6 millimeters. And I'm sorry, I'm kind of blocking that out right there. Okay. Skin cancer types, malignant versus benign. Benign cancers, remember, cancer is basically uncontrolled cell division. So it's mitosis gone wild. And it can actually not always be a terrible thing. So a benign one is not spreading rapidly. It's not going into other tissue types. It's not moving through the bloodstream. And then we have our malignant versions. So our three main types of skin cancer here that is shown. We have squamous cell carcinoma, basal cell carcinoma, and we usually have the word malignant melanoma in front of that. Malignant melanoma is definitely the most dangerous, whereas basal cell carcinoma is very highly treatable, and squamous cell carcinoma is treatable if it is caught quickly. All right, developmental aspects of the skin and body membranes. So just some things to think about. We have when a baby is born, it has this case basically around it, and it's kind of looks like they have a lot of the white type of sunscreen on. It's called vernix caseosa. It's to help protect them in the very, very watery environment that they were in when they were in the placenta. Sometimes babies will have this little real soft little baby hairs all over them that make them look a little fuzzy. That is called milia. And we want to add in like some ailments as well. So dermatitis, we talked a tiny bit about that just a minute ago. There's so many different types of dermatitis. You can get it from working with like CLR. Let's say that you're cleaning your bathroom, you're not wearing proper gloves, even though you should. It says you should on the container, but you choose not to, so you get a red, irritated skin from working with that. Male pattern baldness is another thing that we discussed. And we also discussed the fact that they're not actually bald. They just have this really soft little fine hairs that are very low pigmented called vellus. So if you look really closely at someone who is quote unquote bald, they do have some real fine little hairs. As we age, we undergo drying of the skin, thinning of the skin, and a loss of hair. And then there's another thing that I wanted to share with you. It is a genetic disorder called hypohidrotic ectodermal dysplasia. And some of you have heard me talk about this before. But one of the things that propelled me towards science was actually this genetic disorder. This is the genetic disorder that my family has, but I am not a carrier of. It is X-linked recessive, and I just wanted to share a little extra. I hope you guys have a great day, and I hope this helped to refresh your memory. See you in class.